We now welcome this interdisciplinary team of researchers and educators. The panel brings together experts from diverse fields, including physics, medical science, philosophy, education, and the humanities, each contributing a unique perspective to a shared exploration of reality and perception. Among them is Dr. Elliot Pines. He has a BA in physics and a master's degree and PhD in electrical engineering. Over the course of his distinguished career, he's worked as a senior scientist and engineer across a wide range of industries, including semiconductor technologies, communications, aerospace, and bio-inspired systems, contributing to innovation and advanced technological development. Alongside his industry work, Dr. Pines has been deeply committed to education, teaching in STEAM fields, and supporting the development of future generations of scientists and thinkers. Even after retiring from formal teaching, his dedication to learning and mentorship continues to have a lasting impact. He currently serves as head of natural sciences sub-department at EHUD, where he contributes to advancing integrative scientific perspectives. Dr. Martin Lachaine is a medical physicist with a PhD in physics from McGill University, whose work focuses on advanced imaging and radiation therapy technologies. Professor Grace Ledbetter is professor of classics and philosophy at Swarthmore, specializing in ancient philosophy, Greek literature, and the foundations of human thought. And Miss Mary Kathleen Pirrello is an accomplished educator in humanities and Holocaust studies with over 3 decades of teaching, research, and academic leadership. A summa cum laude graduate in English secondary education and theology, she's pursued advanced studies in Judaic thought and Holocaust studies, including specialized training at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Throughout her distinguished career, she's served as chair of the English department and educator of International Bachelorette Humanities, developing and teaching a dedicated Holocaust Studies course. Her work has been recognized with the Teacher of the Year Award, and her students have received national literary honors. She presently serves as educator of EHUD's social media editing and content department and contributes as pedagogical researcher and curriculum developer within the EHUD education department. She is also a member of the board of directors of EHUD Switzerland. And finally, Miss Jasmin Flum is a founding member and president of EHUD Switzerland with a background in communication and business administration. Raised in a multicultural environment, she's developed a strong commitment to social impact and human connection. After beginning her career in intellectual property in Geneva, she became actively involved in humanitarian and social projects across Europe and Africa, focusing on integrative approaches to societal development. Alongside her work in EHUD, she's also engaged in cultural initiatives as an event organizer and promoter of artists, contributing to the creation of meaningful connections through integrative art and community. Her work's driven by a deep dedication to improving human relations and fostering a more interconnected and sustainable world. Together, they represent a truly interdisciplinary dialogue, bridging science, philosophy, education, and human experience. Their work proposes a new framework that connects these domains, suggesting that reality itself may be understood as an interconnected system shaped not only by matter, but also by perception, information, and meaning. This promises to be a rich and thought-provoking exploration at the intersection of science, philosophy, and human understanding. So, guys, the floor is yours.
Thank you, I hope. Let's see. Okay, I hope everything is visible here. And to begin, welcome to both a new theory of universal academic language as well as a new approach in team presentation. The presentation is but a taste of the research, but we're planning a full paper or separate ones as a series for hopeful publication later in the year. This, as well as adding to the continuous growth and expansion of Ehud in its new AI book. What you're about to experience is an ordered sequence of 5 Google Notebook LM overview videos based upon the Pirrello seed writings connected through brief themed interludes using Google Vids. In this, some minor loss in precision due to the AI's take on the original writings has been played off against a hopefully more engaging and simplified yet standardized presentation style whose general continuity with spice breaks is likely to prove more informative and interesting to the viewer. The first, in joint effort by Elliot Pines and Martin Lachaine, is an introduction into a remarkable history cojoining psychology with physics. This process, beginning a century ago with the collaboration between the psychologist Carl Jung and the quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli, has evolved into what may well be an understanding of our reality as a story. This concept has a deep resonance with the universal monomyth legend that is simultaneously personal biography, known as the hero's journey. From this, there is an expansion into multidimensional interactivity with other participants and perspectives, becoming the Dramatica theory of mental relativity, and possibly a still more far-reaching possibility regarding present research into AI autoregression, language as a guiding structure independent of the particulars of sensory perception. The second, again a collaboration by Dr. Lachaine and Dr. Pines, looks at physics described as a story, in fact, best understood as an ever-unfolding one. The purpose here is a first entrance of the subject into the proposed universal language mode, not to be confused with its role in the introductory video as part of the history leading to a story view of reality. The third goes to philosophy in story through the deep insight of Grace Ledbetter into the foundations of Western philosophy itself in Plato's dialogues. Professor Ledbetter demonstrates that across Plato's works, touching on what philosophy and philosopher are all about, particularly regarding his allegory of the cave, is itself a fundamental hero's journey related also to Carl Jung's concept of individuation. This individuation is the universal becoming the individual that implies integral unity as the next level up in the evolution of being. This is also the Dramatica concept of the story's immanent and transcendent story mind. Professor Ledbetter demonstrates that universal story mind structure can appear not only as a linear biographical narrative, but also, as in the case in Plato, as key elements in a large corpus of work. The fourth is an eye-opening analysis by Kathleen Pirrello that follows foundations of Western literary culture by revealing the classic Odysseus in the language of the hero's journey. Here, Jung's underlying individuation concept is brought directly to the surface. One may be surprised to discover that the prose depicting the mythical exploits of an ancient Greek character are as well a foretelling of the stories of our own lives millennia later. The fifth, by Jasmin Flum, draws out the full creative and psychological depth of diverse brain function and unity of mind in all this through the arts. This in a manner that, as it were, demonstrates the individuation of our internal human community of varied perceptions into a unified mental model of interpretation. This brings us full circle in our universal story language concept, back into the cradle of psychology and physics, completing and unifying our presentation. The five of us wish you all a most informative, interesting, and enjoyable journey.
You've probably heard the idea, right? That our entire reality might just be an incredibly advanced computer simulation. But what if that's the wrong metaphor? I mean, what if the universe isn't built like a computer at all, but more like a story? Today, we're diving headfirst into a really mind-bending hypothesis that reframes everything we think we know about reality as one giant unfolding narrative. So, let's start with the big one, the simulation hypothesis. This idea has seriously leaped from the pages of science fiction into some pretty intense academic debates. You've got people like Elon Musk talking about it, and the philosopher Nick Bostrom really gave it weight, arguing that statistically, the odds are we're not in base reality. It's a super compelling thought, for sure, but is it the only way to look at this?
Okay, here's our game plan.
First, we're going to unpack that popular simulation hypothesis and look at the actual scientific hunt for a glitch in the matrix. Then we're going to pivot to an even bigger idea, reality as a story. We'll explore the universal grammar that might run this story, connected to everything from ancient myths to modern AI, and finally, we'll talk about what this all could mean for our future.
All right, so let's kick things off with the concept that's really dominated this whole conversation for years, the simulation hypothesis. And, this isn't just some late-night thought experiment. It's treated as a serious concept in both philosophy and science. So the basic idea, laid out by Nick Bostrom, goes something like this. Any civilization that gets advanced enough to simulate its own past probably would. And since you can have a ton of simulations, but only one base reality, the chances are we're in one of the simulations. But here's the key assumption, and this is important. It assumes that the base reality is physical, material, stuff. Our world would just be a computational layer running on top of that. Right, so if our universe really is a computer program, then it has to have some kind of limitations, right? It should have pixels. So physicists launched a serious hunt for evidence, basically searching for those telltale glitches in the matrix.
And the main thing they were looking for was something called a space-time lattice. I mean, if reality is being computed, it can't be infinitely smooth. It would have to be built from tiny, discrete points, kind of like the pixels on your screen. And a grid like that would have effects we could actually see. For example, physics should behave a little differently if you're moving along the grid versus, say, diagonally. There'd be a sort of directional grain to reality. To test this, scientists looked at these ultra-high-energy cosmic rays, particles that have traveled across just unbelievable cosmic distances. They figured that if this grid existed, it would mess with the distribution of these rays. It would reveal the underlying structure. So after all this rigorous searching for the universe's pixels, what did they actually find? Yep, absolutely nothing. The search came up completely empty. The cosmic rays showed no evidence of a grid, no directional preference, nothing. As far as we can possibly tell, our universe is perfectly, weirdly smooth and uniform. And this slide really lays it out. A computer grid would be anisotropic, meaning physics would depend on your direction. You'd have a grainy reality. But what we actually see is perfect isotropy, a totally smooth reality where the laws of physics are the same no matter which way you look. The fact that we can't find this grid, it strongly suggests we might need to think about reality in a completely different way. And this is where we make our big turn. The failure to find any physical evidence for a simulation pushes us to think beyond a purely computational model. So, if reality isn't a computer, what could it be? Let's explore a model that's based not on processing information, but on meaning, participation, and narrative. The famous physicist John Wheeler had this great phrase, "it from bit," meaning that at its core, the universe is made of information. But what if that's only half the picture? This new idea takes it a step further. It suggests reality isn't just raw data, or bits, but meaningful, responsive information, or wit. The universe isn't just a computer crunching numbers, it's a story that we are actively participating in. Cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman's interface theory helps make a really crucial distinction here. He argues that our senses didn't evolve to show us objective reality. Instead, they gave us a simplified user interface. Think of the icons on your computer desktop that helps us survive. Now, this is totally different from the simulation idea. The simulation assumes there's a physical material base reality running the code. Hoffman suggests what's fundamental might not be material at all. It might be a network of conscious agents, and what we call spacetime is just our headset. This whole idea of a mind-like reality actually brings to mind the historic partnership between Wolfgang Pauli, a physicist, and Carl Jung, the psychologist. They were fascinated by the link between mind and matter, which led to Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences. Now think about it. In a computer simulation, a synchronicity is just a bug, a random glitch. But in a narrative reality, it's a feature. It's a plot point, an event that's required to keep the story coherent and moving forward. So, if reality operates like a story, does it have a grammar? Is there a predictable structure? This brings us to this really remarkable theory called Dramatica, which might just be a map of this narrative reality. Okay, the core concept of Dramatica theory is the story mind, and this is wild. It proposes that a truly complete story isn't just entertainment. It's an actual functional model of a single human mind working its way through a problem. Every single element, the characters, the plot, the theme, they all map directly onto a specific cognitive function. A story is literally a blueprint for how a mind thinks. And to build this complete model of a mind, Dramatica says you need to explore the problem from 4 essential perspectives, or through lines. You've got the objective, they perspective, the big picture. You have the personal, I perspective of the main character. Then you need the challenging, you perspective from an influence character. And finally, the relational, we perspective that explores their dynamic. Only when you have all 4 can you have a complete story, or a complete understanding of a problem.
Now, this whole narrative framework didn't just appear out of thin air. It actually stands on the shoulders of a long history of holistic thinking, and pretty amazingly, it connects directly to some of the most cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence today.
If you look at the 20th century, you can see this clear shift away from breaking things down into tiny pieces and a return to looking at the big picture. You had general systems theory searching for universal principles. You had chaos theory showing us how amazing complexity can emerge from simple rules. It's right in the middle of that wave that Dramatica came along. And now, research into large language models seems to be independently discovering these very same ideas. A fantastic way to understand Dramatica's depth is to put it next to Joseph Campbell's famous hero's journey. The hero's journey is an incredibly powerful pattern, no doubt. But it's really a deep dive into just one of Dramatica's 4 through lines, the main character's personal journey. What Dramatica does is expand that single biographical path into a complete cognitive architecture, a full model of a mind at work.
And this is where modern AI comes in and things get really fascinating. Research by Alan Barinholtz on large language models is showing us something incredible. These AIs create meaning not because they understand the outside world, but because they recognize the patterns and the structural relationships inside the language itself. Meaning just emerges from the structure. And that is the exact same principle that Dramatica proposes for stories. A story feels true because its internal structure is sound, not because it's a perfect photo of reality.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, this isn't just some abstract philosophical game. The researchers behind this framework actually see it as the very beginning of a new practical science of communication. They see this as a tiny seedling that has some unbelievable potential. By understanding the universal grammar of this story mind, we might be able to create a kind of Rosetta Stone for communication, a way to bridge the gaps between fields as different as physics, art, and psychology, letting them all speak a common structural language. But, and this is really important, they're quick to add a crucial note of humility. They stress that this is all highly theoretical. They're taking baby steps into a brand new field of research. It's a bold, amazing proposal, but it's not a final, settled fact. So we've gone from a universe of bits to a universe of meaning, from a reality that's computed to one that's narrated. This idea really stretches in 2 directions. It shows how a complex model like the story mind can contain simpler frameworks, like the hero's journey, as just one piece of the puzzle. And it looks forward, showing how the principles Dramatica found in human stories are now being rediscovered in the architecture of AI. This shift in perspective, from seeing ourselves as data points in a program to characters in a story, it changes everything. It reframes the big question from what is real to what is meaningful. And if our universe truly is a story, it's an invitation to be an active participant, not just a passive observer. So I guess that leaves one last question. What part will you play?
Today, we're diving into a pretty wild idea. What if the universe itself is shaped like a story? It sounds out there, I know, but let's see where the evidence takes us.
So, what could possibly connect the weirdness of quantum mechanics with, say, the plot of your favorite movie? I mean, on one side, you've got hard science, particles, forces, objective reality. And on the other, you have the world of human storytelling, characters, conflict, all that subjective stuff. But what if they're just 2 different languages trying to describe the very same thing? Here's the plan. We'll start by looking at this unlikely connection. Then jump into some hidden parallels. We'll see what happens when the math itself hits a wall. And then we'll look at the history of science as its own story. After that, we'll ask if maybe this is all just a trick of the mind, before we weigh the 3 most likely possibilities.
Okay, so let's just start with how totally different these 2 worlds seem on the surface. Physics and storytelling. I mean, you couldn't really pick 2 things that feel further apart, right?
You know, one is all about math, universal laws, stuff that's true whether we're here or not. The other is all about us, our psychology, our emotions, our search for meaning. They seem to exist in completely separate realities, but do they?
Well, here's a thought. What if physics isn't just a pile of facts about the universe, but is actually a story we tell ourselves to make sense of it all? It's a classic hero's journey, really. We start with a problem, a mystery we don't understand, and we search for a solution. An elegant, beautiful theory.
All right, let's get to the really interesting part, the evidence. We're going to look at 4 specific parallels between the fundamental laws of physics and a really deep, comprehensive theory of storytelling called Dramatica.
These are our 4 big clues. First, how things are organized, from the huge to the tiny. Second, how everything seems to be moving towards some kind of resolution. Third, the critical role of information itself. And fourth, why you always need more than one point of view to see the whole picture.
So, first up, hierarchy. Both the universe and stories are kind of built like those Russian nesting dolls. In physics, you have fundamental forces that govern particles, which make up atoms, which make molecules, which, eventually make us. And in a story, you have big overall themes that break down into smaller plot points, which then break down into individual character choices. It's this fractal pattern, where the shape of the whole thing is echoed in all of its little parts.
Now, this brings us to a really, really weird coincidence. You've got this Dramatica theory, which is trying to build a complete model of a human mind, how it processes a problem. And then you have this powerful neural network, D3M, which was built to simulate the formation of an entire universe. So 2 completely different projects, but both are trying to do the same thing: create a complete, self-contained model of a super complex system.
And somehow they both landed on this exact number, 32,768. The Dramatica theory says there are exactly 32,768 unique complete story structures. And the D3M simulation, it runs best when it uses 32,768 particles. And that number, by the way, isn't just random, it's 2 to the power of 15. Now, is this just a crazy coincidence? Yeah, almost certainly. But it's the kind of coincidence that makes you go, It makes you wonder if any complete model, whether it's of a mind or a universe, just naturally runs into the same kinds of limits. And the parallels just keep coming. Think about resolution. A story always starts with a problem, an imbalance, and moves toward a new state of balance at the end. Well, physical systems do the exact same thing. They always seek the lowest possible energy state, or equilibrium. Then there's information. A lot of physicists now think information isn't just something in the universe, it's what the universe is made of. And of course, stories are pure information. And finally, you have perspectives. You can't have a good story without different characters' points of view, and quantum physics has famously shown us that you can't measure something without becoming part of the experiment. The observer changes the observed. Okay, so what happens when our really elegant, beautiful models of physics, our stories, just hit a dead end? Well, it turns out this is bound to happen because the very language we use for physics, math, has its own built-in limits. See, physics uses what are called finite mathematical models. You can basically think of it as drawing a box around a piece of reality. Inside the box, you have a set number of rules and pieces that all interact in a predictable way. But that's always just an approximation, right? Because the real world doesn't live inside a neat little box. And over the centuries, mathematicians started finding these deep cracks in the whole idea of a perfect model. They ran into infinities hiding in simple equations, and they discovered these totally bizarre mathematical functions, like lines that were so jagged they were basically infinite in length. This whole wave of uncertainty eventually led to the work of a logician named Kurt Gödel.
And this is the real kicker. Gödel proved that any logical system you can create, including mathematics, will always contain statements that are true, but that you can never, ever prove are true using that system's own rules. There will always be truths just over the horizon of what your model can see. Our story can never truly be complete.
So what does this all mean for physics? Well, it leads to a pretty stunning conclusion. The so-called theory of everything, that single, beautiful equation that explains the whole universe, is actually a mathematical impossibility. The very language we use to describe reality is guaranteed to be incomplete, and that means every story we tell about the universe will eventually need a sequel.
So if our scientific models are basically just incomplete stories, why don't we look at the entire history of physics as one big, sprawling epic? I mean, it's got all the right ingredients: heroes, villains, conflict, major plot twists. You can see a clear 3-act structure. Act 1 is Newton. He sets the stage, gives us the basic rules of the game. Act 2 is all about the huge conflict between Einstein and Bohr over what reality even is at the quantum level. Then comes a major turning point, this idea that more is different, that you can't understand a complex system just by looking at its tiniest parts. And that brings us to today, which feels like a classic Act 3 crisis, where the old ways of thinking just aren't working anymore.
And that central conflict between Einstein and Bohr is just perfect. You've got Einstein, our protagonist, who is desperately clinging to the idea of a logical, orderly universe where God does not play dice. And then you have Bohr, the classic influence character who shows up to challenge everything the hero believes, saying, essentially, the world is way weirder than you think. Their debate was more than just science, it was high drama.
Okay, we've laid out a pretty compelling story here. But let's be good scientists, good thinkers, and pump the brakes. We have to introduce the big counterargument. This is our moment of doubt. What if this is all just in our heads? I mean, human brains are pattern-matching machines. That's what we do. We see animals in the clouds. We see constellations and a random scatter of stars. So are we just forcing the universe into a story-shaped box because that's the only shape our brains know how to use? The brilliant physicist Richard Feynman had a great warning about this exact kind of thinking. He said that explaining how magnets work by comparing them to rubber bands is basically cheating. Why? Because then you have to explain how rubber bands work. And if you dig deep enough, you find out they work because of electromagnetic forces, the very thing you were trying to explain in the first place. It's circular. So we have to ask, are we doing the same thing? Using stories to explain physics and physics to explain stories without actually getting anywhere new?
So where does all this leave us? We've got the weird parallels, the limits of math, the history, and a big dose of healthy skepticism. When you put it all together, there are really 3 different ways you can look at all of this.
First, there's the deflationary view. This says it's all us. The patterns are a reflection of our minds, not the universe itself. Second is the inflationary view. This is the big one. It says, no, this is real. The universe actually has a narrative structure, and we're just now discovering it. And third is the pragmatic view, which basically says, who cares if it's real or not? Thinking this way is a super useful tool. It helps us ask better questions, communicate complex ideas, and push science in new directions.
In the end, we just don't know the answer. But exploring the question itself is what's really valuable. It forces us to look at the universe and our place in it in a completely new light. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If the universe really is a story, what's the plot? Thanks for joining me. You know, when you think about philosophy, you probably picture dusty books and complicated arguments, right? But what if I told you there's more to it? What if, hidden inside Plato's famous dialogues, there's actually a story, a powerful, universal narrative about struggle, transformation, and finding wisdom? And that's the wild idea we're going to explore. What if the world's most famous philosophy is secretly an adventure story? We're going to look at all of Plato's work, not as a bunch of separate conversations, but as one single epic meta-narrative that follows the classic hero's quest. All right, so here's our game plan, our map for this whole quest. We'll start with this idea of Plato's hidden story. Then we'll follow the journey from the very beginning through the tough inner battles, the big climactic trials, and finally, how our hero returns to the world with some hard-won wisdom. Okay, so you're probably wondering, how is this even possible? I mean, Plato's dialogues aren't exactly a chapter book, right? They're philosophical conversations. But here's the cool part. When you start piecing together the big moments from all his major works, a pattern starts to emerge. And this pattern, it looks a lot like a universal story of transformation. And that framework, that pattern, has a name, the hero's journey. You might have heard of it from Joseph Campbell, but it's really based on the work of Carl Jung. Think of it like a symbolic map, a blueprint for this incredible arc of transformation that you see in myths and stories from all around the world. It's all about awakening, facing trials, and finally integrating what you've learned.
So the first half of this journey follows a really clear path. It always kicks off with the call, that moment that wakes the hero up. That leads to the departure, where they leave their old world behind, and then this descent into a deeper, kind of confusing reality. This is where they have to face their shadow, the darker parts of themselves, and the anima, which is all about integrating new, maybe even opposite perspectives. All of this is building up to the really big tests.
And then we get to the final, absolutely crucial stages. This is where the hero has this profound, life-changing encounter with the self, which leads to the death of the old ego. But hold on, the journey's not over yet. The last, and honestly often the hardest part, is the return to the world and figuring out how to integrate all this new wisdom into everyday life. Okay, so let's get into it. How does this whole epic journey actually start in Plato's philosophy? Well, like any great story, it begins with a call to adventure. All right, stage 1, the call. This is that moment that basically defines the hero's destiny. It's often described as a prophetic call, something that just pulls them onto a new path. And for our philosopher hero, Socrates, this call was, well, pretty literal. So in Plato's Apology, we basically get Socrates' origin story. His buddy goes to the oracle at Delphi, which for the Athenians was like the most sacred place on earth, and asks if anyone is wiser than Socrates. The oracle's answer? Nope. Socrates is completely floored by this. He's like, me? Wise? No way. So he takes it as a divine mission from the god Apollo himself. He figures he has to spend the rest of his life questioning people to figure out what true wisdom even is. And boom, that's the moment his whole philosophical quest begins. Okay, so once the hero answers that call, the next step is to leave their ordinary world behind. And look, this isn't always about packing a bag and hitting the road. Sometimes it's about departing from the values and ideas of your own society.
And Socrates does this in a big way. He's constantly criticizing how his fellow Athenians think about things. For instance, in the Republic, he calls them out for teaching their kids to just look just in order to get a good reputation, while secretly doing whatever they want. For them, justice is just a tool for social climbing. By challenging this stuff, Socrates totally separates himself from the hoi polloi, or the many. He's basically leaving home by rejecting its core beliefs.
Now, the next phase of the journey, this is where things get really tough. The hero has to turn inward and go down into a kind of symbolic underworld. This is a journey into the unconscious, right? A place of total disorientation and crisis, where reality itself gets called into question.
So this is stage 3, the descent into the unconscious. In stories, this might look like entering a dark forest or a confusing labyrinth, or in Plato's most famous example, a cave. It's that moment where the hero's conscious mind starts to lose its grip, and they're forced to face a reality they never even knew was there. And Plato gives us the perfect image for this in the Republic, the allegory of the cave. You've got these prisoners who have been chained their whole lives, just staring at shadows on a wall. That's all they know. They think it's reality. When Socrates' friend says, "Wow, what a weird image," Socrates delivers the absolute knockout punch. He says, "They are like us." And that's the descent, that terrifying moment of realizing that what we call reality might just be a shadow of the actual truth.
So while you're down in this inner world, you have to confront a couple of key figures or archetypes. First up is the shadow, all the unacknowledged kind of negative parts of your own personality. And then there's the anima, or animus, this archetype of the opposite gender that you have to integrate to become whole.
And believe it or not, Plato gives us really clear examples for both. The shadow, that shows up in the Republic, where our appetites are described as a hydra, this multi-headed monster of destructive desires that if you let it will totally enslave you. Then, for the anima, you look at the Symposium. Here, Socrates, a man, learns the true nature of love, or eros, from a wise priestess named Diotima. And what's wild is, she's the only female character who actually gets to speak in any of Plato's dialogues. He has to integrate her wisdom to complete his own philosophy.
All right, every good journey builds to a climax, right? That final defining test where the hero faces their biggest trial and is just fundamentally changed by it. This is the moment the whole quest has been leading to.
And that brings us to stage 6, trials and transformation. This is the ultimate ordeal. It's a moment of incredible struggle, often involving a symbolic death or even a literal one. And the hero emerges on the other side with a totally new understanding and a new purpose.
For Socrates, this stage wasn't symbolic at all. It was his actual historical trial. Athens put him on trial for corrupting the youth and not believing in the city's gods. And, well, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. But the way Plato tells it in the Apology, this wasn't a defeat. It was the ultimate philosophical victory. Because even though he lost the legal battle, his defense basically created the blueprint for philosophical investigation that we still follow today. He was transformed into a martyr for the truth.
So after surviving the ultimate trial, the hero gets the ultimate reward, a direct encounter with some kind of divine or ultimate truth. And this experience is so powerful, so profound, that it leads to the death of the old self, the ego, and the birth of a completely new one. Plato calls this a numinous experience. It's this encounter with what he calls the eternal forms, like the form of goodness, or as you see in this quote from the symposium, the form of beauty. This isn't just about learning a new idea. It's this awe-inspiring, mind-blowing revelation, what he calls a highest mystery that's way beyond our normal perception. It's like getting a glimpse behind the curtain, at the divine, unchanging reality that's behind our world of shadows.
And yeah, an encounter like that, it changes everything. As Plato puts it in the Republic, this isn't just about adding a new piece of knowledge to your brain. It is a complete and total reorientation of the soul. The person who goes through this is fundamentally transformed. Their old way of looking at the world, their old self, it dies. And it makes way for a new consciousness that's centered on this higher truth.
But here's the thing. The hero's journey doesn't end on the mountaintop with that amazing revelation. The final and, often the most treacherous part of the whole quest is still ahead. Coming back to the ordinary world and trying to integrate that cosmic wisdom into a normal human life. So now we're at stages 9 and 10, the return and integration. The hero has to bring the treasure back home. They have to go back to the cave they fought so hard to escape. But this return is full of danger. See, the hero has changed, but the world hasn't, and that leads to a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of conflict. The final challenge is to actually live this new wisdom, to embody it.
And Plato paints a really vivid picture of this. The philosopher who escapes the cave, he says, has a duty to go back and help the others. But there's a problem. His eyes are now used to the brilliant light of truth, so when he goes back into the darkness, he can't see properly anymore. The other prisoners just laugh at him. They think he's gone crazy. He is completely and totally misunderstood. And who does that sound like? Socrates, a guy who is viewed with so much suspicion by his fellow Athenians. But through that struggle, he achieves that final stage, integration. He becomes the wise elder we see in Plato's dialogues, calm, okay with paradox, and embodying the wisdom he gained from his incredible journey.
So when you look at it this way, Plato's philosophy isn't just a bunch of arguments. It's a timeless map for the journey towards moral clarity. It was a guide for escaping the cave of his time, which, of course, leaves us with one last big question. What are the shadows being projected on the walls of our cave today? You ever feel lost? Like you're on this long, hard journey, not just to get to someplace, but to get back to the person you're supposed to be? Well, for thousands of years, one story has been the ultimate map for that exact feeling. I'm talking about Homer's Odyssey. And today, we're going to see how this ancient epic, this story you probably think is just about monsters and gods, is actually a timeless, powerful blueprint for psychological transformation, for finding your way home to yourself. I want to kick things off with this incredible thought from the philosopher Simone Weil. What she's saying here is that the really big achievements, the deepest truths, they're not about one person's ego. They're essentially anonymous. They tap into something universal. And that, right there, is the secret power of the Odyssey. Odysseus' journey isn't just his story. It's a reflection of every single person's struggle to become whole. It's our story. And that's why it's stuck around for millennia. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to uncover the timeless blueprint that all great stories seem to follow. Then, we'll meet our hero Odysseus and see how his epic trip was really all happening inside his own head. We'll come face to face with his inner monsters and we'll track his incredible change from a reckless warrior to a wise man. And finally, we'll talk about how you can use this ancient map to navigate your own life. Okay, let's get into the big idea that really unlocks this whole thing. To see the Odyssey for what it is, we got to look at it through the eyes of Joseph Campbell. Now, Campbell was this brilliant mythologist who studied stories from all over the world, from ancient Greece to Native American folklore, and he found something amazing. Underneath it all, humanity is basically telling itself the same story over and over again. He saw it as proof of the psychic unity of mankind, with the blueprint for it hidden in our greatest myths.
He called this universal pattern the monomyth, but you probably know it as the hero's journey. And it's a cycle, just like you see here. A hero gets called away from their normal world. They face a bunch of terrifying trials, and they finally come home. But they're not the same person. They've been transformed. They bring back some kind of wisdom or gift. Campbell said the whole point of this story is to make the world transparent to transcendence, which is just a beautiful way of saying it helps us see the epic, the divine, right here in our own messy human lives.
So this journey pretty much always happens in 3 big acts. First, you've got the departure, that call to adventure that rips the hero away from everything they know. Then comes the initiation. That is the long, dark road of trials where they get tested, broken down, and forced to face their biggest fears. That's the real heart of the story. And finally, if they make it through, there's the return, where they come back home, but with new eyes, carrying the wisdom they earned in the darkness. This is the skeleton key to basically every story we love, and the Odyssey is maybe the most perfect example ever.
So, let's turn to our guy, Odysseus. His 20-year quest to get home from the Trojan War is the classic hero's journey. But here's the real genius of the story. The physical journey across the sea, it's all a metaphor. The real story is the psychic journey. It's the painful, difficult, and totally necessary transformation of one man's soul.
You know, about a century ago, the psychologist Carl Jung actually gave this process a name, individuation. He said it's the lifelong journey we are all on to become our true, authentic selves. It means bringing together all the parts of you, the good parts you show the world, and the shadow parts you try to hide. It's about becoming whole. And Odysseus' story, it's the ultimate literary example of this exact process. The slow, painful, and incredible transformation from a one-note warrior into a complete, wise, and real human being.
This slide lays it out perfectly. You've got these two journeys happening at the same time. On the left, the external one. His goal is the island of Ithaca, and his obstacles are literal monsters and angry gods. But look at the right. That's the real story. The goal isn't a place, it's a state of being, wholeness. And the monsters aren't in the ocean, they're inside his own head. It's his ego, his pride, his impulses. His quest to get back to his house is really a metaphor for learning to become the master of his own inner house. Okay, this is where the story gets really, really deep. We can now look at all of Odysseus' famous adventures in a whole new light. Those monsters and goddesses he runs into, they're not just random obstacles. Psychologically, each one is a perfect physical representation of his own inner demons, the flaws and issues he's been trying to run from.
To get home, Odysseus has to face his biggest enemy, himself. At the start, yeah, he's a brilliant warrior, but he is a deeply flawed man. He's got this toxic arrogance, this hubris. After he blinds the Cyclops, he just has to shout out his own name, a dumb boast that brings down the wrath of the sea god Poseidon on him for a decade. He has no self-restraint, this desperate need for control, and it's constantly putting his crew in danger. And maybe biggest of all, he's emotionally cut off, totally disconnected from the feminine, intuitive side of his own soul. So every monster he meets is like a custom-built test designed to make him face one of these demons.
His entire 10-year trip home is basically one long forced therapy session. In the Cyclops' cave, his muscles are useless. He has to learn humility and rely on his wits and his team. On the islands with Circe and Calypso, he faces a totally different kind of monster, the temptation to just give up. He could forget his quest and live in paradise forever. For a man of action like him, that's a huge threat. By saying no, he starts to integrate the powerful feminine energy he's always pushed away. But his toughest trial was still to come.
The absolute lowest point of his journey, his rock bottom, is his literal trip down to Hades, the underworld. This is really a journey into the darkest corners of his own unconscious mind. There, he has to confront death itself. But the biggest blow comes when he sees the ghost of his own mother. He finds out she died from a broken heart, just waiting for him to come home. That's the moment it all changes. The full weight of his ego, of his journey, just comes crashing down on him. It's that grief that finally shatters his old warrior identity and makes room for a new, wiser man to be born.
This intense internal struggle leads to a total rewiring of his personality, and there's this really cool modern story theory called Dramatica that gives us a powerful way to see this change. Dramatica theory says a great story is basically a map of a single mind trying to solve a problem. It's not just that the character changes, it's that the very logic they use to see the world gets fundamentally rewritten, and in the Odyssey we see a perfect picture of that exact leap.
So, this is the crucial shift. The guy who left for Troy had a warrior mindset. His answer to every problem was just hit it harder. His whole identity was about being a somebody, a famous king, a legendary hero. But the man who comes back has a sage mindset. His new approach is all about wisdom, patience, and knowing when not to act. And the irony is, his new strength comes from embracing being a nobody, a humble person who gets his real place in the universe.
This transformation gets this beautiful, perfect symbol the second he finally gets back to Ithaca. The goddess Athena, his guide, doesn't make him look like a mighty king. Nope, she disguises him as a frail old beggar.
And this isn't just a costume for sneaking around. It's the physical proof of his new, humbled self. The great irony is that to get his kingdom back, he has to completely let go of being a king. He has to win not with force, but with the quiet power of a nobody, humility, patience, and wisdom.
And when Odysseus finally reveals himself to his son, Telemachus, the change is so shocking his own kid doesn't think he's human. He cries out, "Stranger, you are no longer what you were. You are one of the gods." Telemachus isn't just talking about a magical makeover. He's seeing with his own eyes a change in his father's very being. The inner journey Odysseus took was so profound it just radiates off of him. The warrior is gone. The wise king has finally, truly come home.
So let's bring it all back home. Why should we care about a 3,000-year-old story today? Because the ideas we've been using to understand it, like Campbell's hero's journey, they aren't just for analyzing books. They are incredibly powerful psychological tools that we can use to understand and reframe our own lives. This ancient blueprint gives us a whole new way to look at our own lives. It helps us find meaning in our toughest struggles. We can actually learn to reframe our life story, not as just a random series of bad things happening, but as our own heroic journey. Think about a time you had a major setback, a job loss, a tough breakup. The victim story says, "This happened to me." The hero story asks, "What is this trying to teach me? How am I supposed to grow from this?" By seeing our challenges as trials meant to make us stronger, we map our own transformations. This is a powerful idea, and it's at the heart of everything from kids' fairy tales to the therapy adults do to find meaning. So, what's the ultimate lesson here? The Odyssey teaches us that while we can't always control the storms life throws at us, we have the power to control the ship. It shows us that true heroism isn't about beating monsters out there, it's about conquering the ones in here. By facing our own pride, our own fears, our own shadow, we can stop being victims of our story and finally become its hero. And that leaves us with one last big question. For Odysseus, Ithaca was his home, sure, but it was also a symbol for wholeness, for peace, for becoming the man he was always meant to be. So as you navigate the storms in your own life, the question isn't if you'll face monsters. The question is, what Ithaca are you journeying towards? Because the journey home starts the moment you finally know where you're going. All right, let's jump right in. Have you ever had that feeling, that really weird, powerful connection you get with a piece of art? You know, something that was made like centuries ago or in a totally different culture?
It's a wild question when you stop and think about it, isn't it? How can something from so far away or so long ago feel like it was made just for you?
I mean, you could be sitting there watching a play by Shakespeare, we're talking 400 years old, and you feel that gut punch of betrayal like it's happening to you right now. Or maybe you're standing in a museum staring at some Renaissance painting. You don't know the artist, you don't know the backstory, but something about the way it's all put together, it just lands. It feels right. You know that feeling? And then there's music, a song with zero lyrics, a crazy jazz solo, or a sweeping symphony that can somehow tell this epic story and make your heart ache without using a single word. So what's the secret? Well, it's not magic. It's architecture, the architecture of our own minds. See, here's the big idea. The really great art, the stuff that lasts, it's not just about showing us something beautiful or making us feel something. It's literally showing us a blueprint of how our own minds work. It's like we're all running on the same basic operating system. And that brings us to this really cool concept, cognitive architecture. Seriously, just think of it like the OS for your brain. It's this incredible, invisible process that takes all the raw data flying at you, light, sound, smells, and it turns it all into your life, into understanding and feelings and stories. And art is what happens when a creator manages to take that internal process and put it out there for all of us to see. Okay, so how does this actually work? Like, what's physically happening inside your brain when you look at a painting or listen to a song? Let's peel back the curtain. It's basically a three-step process. First, you've just got raw data. Photons hitting your eyes, vibrations hitting your ears. It's just noise, right? No meaning yet. Then, step 2, your cognitive architecture boots up. And this is where the magic happens. Your brain is this amazing pattern-finding machine, and it just starts sorting and structuring all that chaos. And then finally, boom, step 3, a meaningful experience. Your brain puts it all together and creates an emotion, a thought, a story. So why is this important? Well, because our brains are basically prediction junkies. They love to guess what's coming next. If a piece of art is way too predictable, we get bored, yawn. If it's total random chaos, our brain just gives up. But that sweet spot, that's where the good stuff is. The art that really grabs us gives us just enough of a pattern to hang on to, but then it throws in enough surprise to keep our brains on the edge of their seats, guessing and totally hooked.
All right, to make this less abstract, let's actually look at this in action. And what better example than one of the most famous scenes ever written? We're talking about the to be or not to be scene from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Because what makes a story truly great, truly complete, is that it hits us from 4 different perspectives all at the same time.
These are what you could call the 4 voices of a story's mind. And what's so cool is that they perfectly mirror how our minds think through a problem. You've got the big picture, they perspective, the personal, I perspective, the challenging, you perspective, and the relationship, we perspective. And Shakespeare, being the genius he was, packs all 4 into this one incredible scene. Okay, first up, the objective story. This is the they view. It's the stuff anyone watching can see, the basic facts of the situation. So, while Hamlet is off in his own world, what's actually happening? The king and his advisor are literally hiding in the wings, spying on him. The fate of the entire kingdom is hanging in the balance. That's your big picture plot. Then we zoom way in. We get the main character's perspective, the I view. And Shakespeare gives us this incredible, direct line into Hamlet's head with that famous soliloquy. We're right there with him, feeling his agony, his total paralysis, as he tries to think his way out of a problem that's all about feeling. Next, we get the you perspective. This comes from the obstacle character. When Ophelia walks in, she is the complete opposite of Hamlet. He's all in his head, she's on her heart. He thinks, she feels. Her very presence is a challenge to him, and it forces this collision between 2 totally different ways of seeing the world.
And finally, the subjective story, the we. This is the real emotional gut punch of the scene. It stops being about Hamlet's internal drama or the kingdom's politics. It becomes about the 2 of them and the absolute destruction of their relationship. We are watching trust and maybe even love just crumble into dust right in front of our eyes. And the reason it's so powerful, so devastating, is because all 4 of these viewpoints are hitting us all at once.
So there you have it. This 4-part structure is kind of the secret sauce in a masterpiece story. But here's where it gets really wild. This isn't just about plays or stories. This exact same blueprint, it's everywhere. The medium changes, sure, but the underlying architecture, it stays the same. So let's check out how it adapts. In theater, right, it's temporal. It happens over time. The 4 voices come at you one after the other. But in visual art, it's spatial. It all hits you at the exact same moment. Think about a classic painting, a portrait. The look on the person's face, that's the I story. The dark, stormy background, that's the they story, the world they're stuck in. That one weird object in the corner, like a skull that feels out of place, that's your you, your obstacle. And the overall feeling you get from it all, that sense of sadness or dread, that's the we story. It's the relationship between all the pieces, telling one cohesive emotional story.
And yeah, music does the exact same thing, but with sound. The main melody, that's your I perspective, the character you're following. The chords underneath, the harmony, that's the they view, the whole world of the song. And then suddenly, bam, a really jarring, dissonant chord hits you. That's the you perspective, the conflict. And the journey the song takes from that ugly sound back to something beautiful and resolved, that is the we story. It's the emotional journey. And I promise you, once you start listening for this, you will hear it everywhere.
So what's at the core of all this? Tension, pure and simple. Art works by creating tension through a visual imbalance, a conflict in a story, a jarring sound in music. It basically poses a question that our brains become obsessed with answering, and that's what hooks us. That's what grabs our attention and just won't let go.
And on the flip side, what our brains crave more than anything is resolution. That feeling of, you get at the end of a great movie, or when a song hits that perfect final chord, that's the feeling of returning to balance. The tension is gone. The question has been answered. And that journey from tension to resolution is one of the most satisfying feelings we can experience. Okay, so what's the big takeaway here? Why does any of this matter? Because this whole system, this cognitive architecture, this deep human need to make patterns out of chaos, it isn't just something for Shakespeare or Picasso. It's for all of us. It's for you. There's this quote that I think just nails it. It says, "We are all artists, composing the stories of our lives while participating in larger narratives of culture, species, and cosmos." It's just perfect, right? Being alive is a creative act. We're all just composing our own personal stories, trying to figure out how they fit into the giant stories being told all around us.
And really, that's the point of this whole thing. This toolkit we've been talking about, the 4 voices, that dance between tension and resolution, we use it every single day. You use it to make sense of your job, your friendships, your family. Every moment, you are taking in the raw, messy data of your life and you are shaping it into a story that makes sense. And once you understand how that process works, well, that gives you the power to write a better story for yourself.
So, that leaves us with one last really important question. If you are the artist, if your mind is the canvas, and you're constantly shaping your reality by the patterns you create, what story are you telling yourself right now? And more importantly, what story will you choose to create next?
When we all truly connect and communicate, all our stories interweave into the great book of humanity's future.
All the world's a stage.
You've been a wonderful audience, very happy endings to your stories.
When we all truly connect and communicate, all our stories interweave into the great book of humanity's future.
All the world's a stage.
You've been a wonderful audience, very happy endings to your stories.
Your questions now, please. Ваши вопросы, пожалуйста. Sorularınızı alabilir miyim?
Do we have any questions in the Zoom? All right. Mr. Averbach. Okay, now I don't see you. I saw you were trying to speak, but...
Я хотел сказать огромное спасибо за такое феерическое представление.
I'd like to congratulate and say thank you very much because it's a very rich presentation. It's definitely not enough to only listen one time because there's so many details. Two aspects. One very serious conversation, probably not enough physical time.
Значит, было сказано, что на сегодняшний день не обнаружена зернистая структура реальности.
It says that up till now we don't have
множество мнений на эту тему. Но одно из них это то, что на масштабе меньше планковского просто нет возможности ничего больше обнаружить. Теория не с точки зрения экспериментальной. Там заканчиваются законы физические не работают. И
I don't think I'm able to translate that.
Вот такой
It's too technical for me. I'm sorry.
Реальности это планковский масштаб, а его ячейки.
Pixels of reality is a Planck mashtab, and it says in the beginning that it was not discovered. And I would like to say it's not true.
В черную дыру его площадь там меняется на 1 бит, в зависимости от того, в какую сторону он идет. Так что, по крайней мере, этот вопрос, мне кажется, просто открытый. Нельзя сказать, что ничего не обнаружено, потому что нет возможности обнаружить.
Maybe Professor Ephraim will help me out to translate this part.
Yeah, the point is the following, that it is still the open question if our universe is just like make from small quantum pieces. It includes both the space and time, or it's not. The point is that Alex point about the Planck size. We have any theoretical or experimental instruments to go inside this size. So there is it's the point that because we cannot solve it, so this is the open question still. Okay.
Right. Yes, I mean, agree. That the whole point. The point is that the theory itself failed because even if we could go on and we had the experimental ability or the theoretical capability, I mean, a very simple thing which mentioned before. If you think about it, if I do a mathematical formula of it, so I have, let's say, a simple thing, mx plus b, like a line, right? Well, the truth is, m can't be infinitely constant because otherwise it's not. There's no rules. So m itself has to be a variable. It has to be a function. B has to be a function. It goes on and as we get closer. I remember once years ago, I was challenged on this by somebody online. We were discussing it, and he said, "Well, don't be ridiculous. For example, the Maxwell equations, right? Everything is set. The speed of light is constant. No, not really. There's something called double or deformed special relativity because there's a problem. If the speed of light was really constant, then the Lorentz transformations would apply also to the Planck length. The Planck length consists of only an algebraic combination of the speed of light, the gravitational constant, and Planck's constant. So we're saying in order to keep C constant, the combination of three constants has to vary. Impossible. So the entire thing deforms in the nature, especially when you get smaller. And they've already working,